Okay, so today I'm in an art studio overlooking, well, I suppose overlooking Chatham Maritime, what would you call it?
Oh, it's just
Museum or just a dock?
No, it's the Historic Dockyard at Chatham, and we're over at the old Victorian, next to the old Victorian Ropery, and that's Chatham Reach out there, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'm talking to Billy Childish. Hello, Billy.
Hello.
And the noises you can hear in the background is a bit of artwork. And that is, you're saying charcoal and what would be oil afterwards, did you say?
Yeah, yeah.
So what would you class yourself as, Bill?
Well, I don't really like identity stuff very much. I think it causes massive problems. I mean, when I do painting, I'm doing some I do stuff. I get into I don't like these art people much. And they sort of like who, you know, because a lot of the time if you become an artist or a musician, that's what you've become, and then you can sort of claim some special status and preferential treatment, which I understand why we want to do that, but it's obviously not intelligent. And for me, stuff has to make some kind of rational sense, and if you're doing art, you're doing some art, maybe. A lot of people aren't even doing that when they're doing it, but you're it's some, you know, all of us do things when we're here, and I suppose your job is to express your nature, and I have always liked drawing and painting, so I do that, and I've always been interested in music, so I do some of that. But when I'm not doing it, you know, I'm not that interested in Billy Childish, apart from he's obviously looked after us a little bit, and we got lucky. Yeah. But it's not sort of like it's not something I overly look at.
I'm sort of, because we've sort of inhabited similar worlds in a weird sort of way for a long time.
Yeah.
Because obviously when you were playing, I think you were in the Milkshakes or the Pop Rivets.
Pop Rivets in 77 to 80.
Right.
And then the Milkshake.
Yeah. I think we were basically playing the same little venues.
Oh yeah, probably if you're local.
Well, I was then.
Yeah.
Not so much now. Along with Graham Seamock's band. And,
oh yeah, Graham. Yeah. Graham.
So I've always been sort of intrigued by, because you've got I find an interesting approach to things, and I don't quite know what it is, but it seems different to a lot of other people. I mean, musically as well. So.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of music during the well, call it music during this lockdown business.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's gone in another slightly odd direction.
Yeah.
So I started this new group called the William Loveday Intention.
Right.
And it really sort of like, I was brought up in the through the 60s, and from about age 3 I was listening to my family. My father was into trad jazz and skiffle, and then some rock and roll, and so I began to hear that sort of music about age 3. Like he bought home some Beatles and some Rolling Stones things, and Bob Dylan. Yeah. And strangely, I got interested in Bob Dylan again for the first time since about 4.
Right.
And the new group we did ended up doing 5 albums over the lockdown. And
so 5 albums in 3 months.
Yeah. And we got a couple of extra. We got 2 that we'd already got going as well before that.
Yeah.
So it must be 6 6 or 7 we've done,
Yeah.
and some radio sessions I did for Mark Riley. But this group I got, there's a pal of mine who I recorded an album for in a group called the Wave Pictures, and he's Dave Tattersall, and he's a really naturally talented, fluent guitarist, and who has never done session work and isn't interested in session work, he's interested in his own thing. And he's always liked what I did, and I asked him if he wanted to play some guitar, because he can play sort of like Bloomfield style guitar, falling off a log, whereas I'm more of a sort of rhythm man, if anything. So we got Dave in, and another pal of mine is learned to play Hammond. He used to be in a couple of the local groups, and actually James Taylor came and did a bit as well with us. And so we basically put together a lineup of sort of like 66 sort of a Dylan-esque lineup,
Right.
with Hammond and rhythm, and then Jim Riley has obviously had to stymie his abilities on the harmonica to sort of fit in.
Right.
And he says he's going to blame me for the harmonica because he can't show how good he is on the recording.
No.
So he says, "I'm going to say you did that." All of this huffing and puffing that Bob does.
Yeah. Cool.
So yeah, so that was quite good, quite good time for us. And then been in here painting.
Yeah.
Made about 40 paintings for some show I'm going to put on in Berlin if the lockdown doesn't return again, because my main gallery's out there.
Okay. So where in Berlin?
They're called Neuger and Schneider, and they're at central Berlin, Leinenstrasse. But you can't find out anything about them because they don't have a website. Because they're, I think that something's vulgar. Oh, and I'm also doing.
And it might be.
And I did put together I've taken photographs, not extensively, but for the quite regularly for the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
So I'm publishing a book of photography from 74 to the present that we're going to launch along with a sort of gallery stint, my New York gallery. I've got a place in Kensington or something, and they asked me if I'd paint there during October. And I said, well, we've got a book we want to launch at the same time, so we're going to do that, and I'll do some painting up there. And I'll probably take Cuddy along, who's my son, who's studying, and he can be in the studio as well as we work. It's some sort of, I think it's some sort of novelty. People actually do stuff in the art world.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
It's a bit like that with music, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's what always shocks me is how little people do.
Yeah.
I'm always surprised how much I do, and I'm sort of think, well, that's just, those old bands used to do quite a lot of recording.
Yeah, they
in
did.
the old days. It wasn't sort of like, because again, like no one's asking me to paint this picture, and nobody asks for those albums.
No.
But I'm fortunate because of the how I work and how quickly I work and what we do, that there's room for that to exist, and there's enough people. We're going to release 4 of those in a box, vinyl box, and with a lyric book that goes with it. For a tour coming out in, I think we've got October, November tour coming out, and then another 2 are going to go in a box with, I'll do a watercolour or something for it, and we'll do a limited 100 box to sort of like try and claw back the recording costs.
Yeah.
Probably lucky if we get the production costs, just because vinyl's expensive.
Yeah.
And then we'll release the other 2 albums during February and March next year, and then I'm going to release 1 to coincide with my exhibition in Berlin, which should be happening at the end of this year on my own. I'm going to reinstate Hangman Records and do a really weird limited edition vinyl with handmade covers.
Right.
And then we got a couple of spares that we have to work out what we do with later. And we've also, in the meantime, made making a box set of 13 hand-cut 45s with 13 sets of 8.
Right.
And a mate of mine can cut this stuff up in Scotland. Used to be in the pot rivets and
Yeah, right.
milkshake, big rust. And again, we put those in a box
Yeah.
and make it nice and interesting, and
Yeah.
try to
Yeah.
claw back the money of producing that. So a lot of these things are not exactly robbing Peter to pay Paul, but what I'm very fortunate with the people I know, in the fact that, like with Steve Lowe, who I work with at L13 in town, is my mate, and we worked together before I had my overnight success as a painter 10 years ago, and we stick together. And the people I like are the people who have an idea, and we're going to do the idea, and then we try and work out how the hell we're going to make it make some sense.
Yes.
We don't ever cut the cloth to fit the,
No,
totally
that's
the
good.
opposite.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what it is, if it's a good idea, if it's worth doing, if you have to change it, then maybe don't bother.
Right. Right.
You know, I don't like producing what anyone wants.
No.
You know, markets and things.
Yeah.
I'm happy I've got one,
Yeah.
but it's like intrinsically against my nature to do what's required.
Yeah. So when you were saying about listening to music, as a kid, your dad bringing stuff back and whatever, when did you start? What came first? Was it the art?
Yeah, because I was tone deaf. I wasn't allowed to be in the choir at school. I was told I was.
That's a theme,
They pulled me out of the choir and said that, they went for everyone because I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And I'd seen the Beatles on television. They mimed, and I thought, well, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
I could be involved. But the only thing that got me involved was because I was one of the only punk rockers in Chatham in '77,
Right.
and these other guys like Bruce and that and Russ who can play, and Bruce is a very erudite guitarist as well, and they'd been playing for a few years. They're a year or so older than me, and they just said, "Do you want to be a singer in a group?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." I just ran into them. It just fell together. I was asked purely, for all the wrong reasons, just for having the right trousers on.
Yeah. Well, there's a history of that, isn't there?
Yeah, probably is.
Bill Wyman had an amp, so he was in the band.
Well,
That was.
yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of Brian and what he did with the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And Keith is one of my favourite guitarists in the Rolling Stones. When, I think that once Brian wasn't involved, it's already a slippery slope. But Brian has got that thing where he was a fan.
Yeah.
And what you want in music are the players and the DJs to be fans, not personalities.
Yeah.
And of course that all went tits up after Monterey, I'd have thought. After Monterey Pop, you can see this weird shift of everything. You see Monterey Pop and you got Mama Cass sitting there nodding her head to Janis Joplin, who's 5 yards away, no fold back, a real playing group.
Yeah.
And also with her group there doing California Dreaming, and you're like, just absolutely jaw-dropping, real music, with real people sat down listening and nodding their head and appreciating it,
Yeah.
not sort of like wigging out. They went along to listen, and they weren't there they weren't there exclusively to be cool. Probably quite a lot of people wanted to be cool, but they it's secondary.
Yeah.
And that's so, that sort of thing, that freshness and reality of that stuff. And also, it's not music to be used on an advert. It's not product placement.
No.
It's real. And we don't have that.
No.
I mean, you get a young group today and they can get their track on advertising Volkswagen. Everyone would say it was cool. Whereas, of course, if Hendrix had did that in '67, everyone would have said it's the squarish thing you could do.
Exactly.
And that's what I really...
Yeah, it was interesting because
integrity is everything.
you've hit on something which has been a thing for me for quite a long time about the sort of commoditisation of music, and you've lost the point of why people did music in the first place, if you see what I mean. And it wasn't to do with, as you say, like some sort of commodity that you could sell, or you could. There was actually something else, you know, some effect that it had on people.
Yeah, and it wasn't.
You know, a state changing.
Yeah, and it was sort of like, you get the feeling that like a lot of this stuff was something that had to be done.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
you look at someone like Janis Joplin compared to someone like Bjork, who sort of like stylistically tries to be, you know, she's obviously. I've seen one thing of Bjork's group where someone's taking the piss out of her first group, of a Super 8 film of them playing in Reykjavik in 1905 or something, and this was apparently worth mocking, and it's the best thing I'd ever seen them do. It was like, had something, but this sort of like a stylistic, like choosing people to represent a style of what something is, and this goes on in art all the time. It's not like in the at least in the 60s, you didn't have people pretending to be like something. So, and when the door opened, the through draft brought everything through with it. They didn't say, well, we've already got that. We've already got the Stones. We don't need the pretty things. We've already got, you know. There was this sort of like a much broader dimension of people who are coming through, and ideas and ways things that could be.
Yeah.
And now you've got that. You know, it really is. We've represented that already. I mean, even in the art world. I mean, a gallery will, you know, I'm the painter in the galleries I'm in. You know, they don't have 6 other ones.
No.
You know, and I've owned the right to be what I'm like.
Yeah.
Taking 40 years. You know, you don't change any. You know, I don't change anything by as far as the perception of what the art world's perception of what could be and how it would be. I'm just allowed to burp at table, you know. He can do that. We don't need anyone else doing that.
No.
And it's that type of closed shop. It's, you know, because it's a very elitist thing, of course, playing in groups, anyway.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You know, or being in the art world.
Yeah.
By its nature.
So when did the music start then, really?
Well, it was
playing, apart from the
77.
singing, because guitar playing and...
Oh, they just got me to try and learn to play a couple of chords, because Bruce wanted a rhythm play.
Oh, okay,
in his
gotcha.
hot release.
Right.
So they taught me a couple of chords, and I was really. There were some people involved in the punk rock thing, which never doesn't really quite get so much of a mention, because most of them were into glam and Bowie and those things on the choir.
Yeah.
Where there were some of us who weren't, who were very few who were into rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know, probably the obvious things would be people who like the Ramones, and you can see where they came from with things, and maybe the Damned, and the Mopeds who were listening to MC5 and those sort of things.
Yeah.
And who weren't just into the glam and the posing, which was posing's fun, but you know, it's not. Again, it needs to be a minority aspect. But but the problem is now when punk rock's looked at, either you've got the sort of like you've got the idiot aspect of rock and roll, or the clever David Bowie aspect of glam, and the idea that you'd have sort of like this sort of central integrity that came around from fools like us in the suburbs believing what Bernie Rhodes and the Sex Pistols fellow McLaren was saying. There is this revolution. It's about homemade and how you do it.
Yeah.
And some people took that as true. And but the amount of people who are like that. There's as Rob Simmons, who's in the Fallen Trees, who was in the original. What's that? Subway Sect. And he comes from. If I talk to Rob, his elder brother listened to Dr. Feelgood and these things, and he was brought up and Rolling Stones. He was brought up in this similar way to me, where I had an older brother, so I was listening to Hendrix when I was 7. After my father had left, there was still music coming in, and we were brought up with this totally different idea. And for me, you know, when 70s came around, for me that was like a pantomime Dane version of the real energy of rock and roll.
Yeah.
And I took it far too seriously, really, in the sense that I didn't want anything to do with that. And during the early 70s, when I was 14 or so, I was going to the rock and roll revival shows down in Chatham, which weren't very good. So Cole Perkins, Bo Diddley, and those Teds, and I didn't think it was very good. But I was looking for something, and I was listening to Bill Haley, Rolling Stones. When I worked in here in '76, and the first thing I did was buy Roll Gold, and the Beatles came out live at Hollywood Bowl '76, and Andrews Sisters, and Bill Haley. Buddy Holly was always one of my big favourites, and I was waiting for something. My brother was studying at Slade in '77 when I was in the dockyard here, and I used to go up and stay there when I was on block release because I was an apprentice stonemason in the dockyard. And there was a concert on one night with Count Bishops and the Trogs and the and Jan.
Oh,
and I thought, and
good
a
mix.
couple other groups playing, at London University at the Slade, and I sort of like, I thought this could be like what I liked, you know, that small venue and that energy and feeling, and I was hook, line and sinker on punk rock in '77, but by the end of '77 it got a bit more yobby and a bit weird, and you had the fashion punks coming in with the leather jackets and mohawks and things, whereas we were all just second-hand gear.
Yeah.
And went quite off of that.
Yeah.
And that's when I basically stopped listening to contemporary music about that time.
Yeah.
And then it was just a journey back through everything. We were sort of like looking, we were touring out of the back of a van, our own transit, no agent and no management, going around Germany.
Right.
Playing
Blimey,
small clubs.
yeah, right, okay.
Oh yeah, well our drummer's girlfriend was Swiss, and she had to go back to Switzerland, and they took herself. We borrowed some stole money and made our own album, and they took it with them. And as a trail, as they went down to Switzerland to clubs, they dropped off, and we went and played those clubs.
Oh wow.
Everything done on our own terms, and that was the pop release.
Right.
And we were sort of like, that's what really began to change things, because Big Russ, those guys were into records and I'm not. And we go to record shops and whatever, and Big Russ found a Link Ray album and put that on the deck, and we were just listening to this stuff, and I was already in the group when I joined the pop release, so I wanted to do Hippie Hippie Shake, which was one of my favourite songs when I was 4, and You Really Got Me, and these things, which we were incorporated into our set, and Glad All Over and things like this that I really liked when I was a little boy. And they were all in the set, and then we heard this Link Ray stuff. So I had this really strong, and Gene Vincent was a big fan of, because I told you I was listening to rock and roll crap.
Yeah.
And I sort of like, so then we heard this Link Ray, and that sort of like, we just thought, our mate who was driving us was Mick Hampshire, who was in a group called Mick and the Milkshakes, which were sort of like, they used to do little cover things, covers, and play with us sometimes. And I first stood up and played with them because I could play 2 chords or whatever. And me and Mick really liked this stuff, and that's what inspired me to play guitar a bit, listening to Link Ray.
It's funny it's Link Ray, because that's he's one of these sort of characters that when you listen to, well, Jimmy Page is one that sort of cites Link Ray as being one of the...
Well, I think they all do, don't they? Even
I think they did.
as well.
Townsend, yeah.
And if you hear...
but you don't hear about Link Ray that much.
No, but one thing that I noticed listening to him, because when we used to cover Comanche, and Comanche is basically my generation.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Na 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 na. Whereas that's na 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 na. Just like it all. And I was never into the Who actually until about. I never really got the Who because I didn't like all that rock stuff and Daltrey prancing around. But then my mates who are mods, a younger lot than me, who ended up with Johnny and Wolf, who ended up doing the Buff Medways with, they're really into that stuff. So I listened to it a bit and wrote some songs like it, because the singer guitarist job is to serve the engine room and vice versa.
Yeah.
So that's what they were into, and I listened to this stuff and I realised what brilliant R&B group they were, which I'd never really knew. And I sort of like absolutely loved that stuff, you know, and their approach to that. Again, up until someone told Roger that he was in a group, and he put on his nan's tablecloth and started twirling around at Monterey. Because at Monterey thing, you've got that, although they still, like when you see the Rock and Roll Circus and things like that, obviously they are still just the most incredible players and the most fantastic unit. And probably one of the, you know, along with maybe Tina Turner, one of the best live acts you'd ever see. But that early R&B and their interest in that Tamla, Motown and those things really gives you something. And that, again, it comes from that fan base, because you can tell it's like when the Rolling Stones started, they thought they couldn't write songs because they weren't black and they weren't dead. And you sort of like, and I think that's fantastic. And you listen to the reverence, or when they had Howlin' Wolf and introduced Howlin' Wolf, and they're like, they're kids in there and they love this. And I think at some point, Bob Dylan gave people a toke on their joint, and these people were sleeping with the girls and thought, you know, we're better than what we like. And I think that is, you know, it really is like, and then you get the big festivals coming in, and this sort of like, everything gets taken away from the base, really.
Yes, but it is that's the thing about, you know, what's the essence of, I've probably said this to you, Huddy, about, you know, what's the essence of this track, or what, you know, what you're actually doing when you're playing. You know, as you're saying about, you know, the engine room of a band and all the rest of it. And a lot of that is lost, you know.
Oh, yeah. And of course,
totally lost in.
And if you've got the engine room, I mean, guitarists get away and murder.
Of course they can.
Totally. And that's where I come in.
Yeah, and me. And me. That's why I've always got.
If the engine room's working, then you can go and have a beer.
Totally. I mean, yeah. If you've got a good bass player and a drummer.
And that's what I love when you watch the Who and you see the Who playing, and you see
Entwistle
and Moon are only staring at Townsend continually. What's happening? They're just watching watching all the time. You know, like they're just totally locked in. It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's right. You don't. That's the thing. You know, you obviously. You sort of learnt on the job, as I did, with playing. Because now when you see these kids that have been to music college and stuff like that, they've not learnt like that. And it's noticeable.
Oh, yeah.
Really noticeable. Yeah. So, we got up as far probably as the milkshakes, have we not?
Probably. We did mention Buff Medways a little bit.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
The milkshakes were basically based on, because I was really brought up mainly on the Beatles, and we had all their albums through from the beginning, and they all got stolen up at a squat. I used to have my brother in '76 up in town when he was at Slade, and I was doing my apprenticeship stuff. I had to go to a building school there in South London. And they all got nicked by the hippies and drug addicts downstairs. But the Beatles were the thing for me. And milkshakes were based on the Star Club Live, which is my favourite Beatles album, Live at the Star Club.
So, was it a bootleg?
I don't think it was. I think it was released. So Harrison, who I really do like, I think he had something to do with stopping it. Oh. Because, you know, I think even George can be a bit of a twat sometimes. Yeah. Even though he's fantastic, you know, one of my favourite players, really, you know, lovely playing. And he was always one of my favourite. You know, when you watch the Beatles anthology, and Harrison's the only one who realises that it was quite quite advantage and quite a thing to have been in the Beatles.
Yeah.
When you get Paul, he's sort of like, just thinks he's God's gift.
Yeah.
But, and of course John was sort of like, John, again, there you got that thing, you see John Lennon and all the Beatles, and they seem like quite intelligent young men up until they start taking drugs, and then they seem like brattish grammar school boys, and Lennon becomes working class.
Yeah, no, it's so weird that.
I mean, what's that about? Working class hero? Why do you need that? That's it, rubbish. I mean, obviously he's not upper class, but that's quite a different thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how about the poetry? You haven't mentioned anything about
Oh, well, the poetry sort of came in with the... What happened was, I liked writing a bit, and but I'm severely dyslexic, and so I've got no qualifications, so it's very difficult for me to get into art schools or anything else. I ended up in the Dockyard. And I was always considered imaginative as a kid. Like I would work out the games we played and things, and I wrote stories regardless that I couldn't spell. And then I learned to read when I was about 14 or so, started, and my first book I decided to read was Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, start small.
Yeah, and
start small and work backwards.
And so I was reading Lord of the Rings and Hornblower and things like that.
Okay.
Stuff I like. Because I always like history stuff,
Yeah.
Royal Navy, and fake history of Tolkien. And
Well, it could be real history.
could be real, probably more real than the one they've got. And I came across some poetry. My brother was interested in my brother was interested in being interesting.
Right.
we had a copy of Knut Hamsun Hunger lying around, which is one of my favourite books, which I tried to read, I couldn't, but it was an early attempt when I was 16. And then we had one book of the Penguin Modern Poets, and it had Edwin Brock, maybe is the name, I vaguely remember.
Yeah.
And they're sort of like, they did publish people like Bukowski and things in some of those. And I read a bit of that, and this is when I wanted to be involved in punk rock. I couldn't sing. I was I was very unsure of myself in many ways. But I wanted to be involved, and you could have these, I saw fanzines when I went to these shows, so I decided to do my own fanzine.
Right.
And then you need to put things in it. And there's a poem by Edwin Brock that I put in there, that I xeroxed out of this book.
Right.
And in the meantime, I discovered Kurt Schwitter's and Dada.
Right.
And I really liked the Dadaists a lot, and I did a lot of work around those lines.
So is that just with poetry or the art as well?
Well, then the poetry came in because Schwitter's did all this sound poetry.
Yeah.
Which I really liked Kurt Schwitter's. So then I started, and I really liked nursery rhymes. I was a big fan of Edward Lear.
Yeah.
And I was interested in writing lyrics to songs and things. So I put these fanzines together, and then when I was at Medway, I got up and read some of these nonsense poems on the canteen table, climbed up on the table and started shouting this poetry stuff, these rants I'd written, well, not really rants, nursery rhyme things, based loosely around that sort of Schwitter's type stuff, and maybe a bit of Hancock thrown in.
Right. Tony Hancock.
Well, they did one where they did modern poetry, which is very, which is very much like based on that stuff, and I really love Hancock.
Yeah.
I was brought up on. That's the other thing that the things that helped me remain sane as a child were Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. I watched all of Monty Python as it came out.
Yeah.
All of these things as they were unfolding, and rock and roll music and Morecambe and Wise.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, when you think about it, it was a bloody interesting time.
Yeah, and I liked all of that. So then I started doing this stuff, and Bill Lewis, who was in a group called Outcrowd, was at
Yeah.
Medway on
Yeah.
the foundation. He's a few years older than me,
Yeah.
and he was involved in a group, a poetry reading group in Maidstone called Outcrowd, and which was run by Rob Earl. Who's
Yeah, I know Rob.
who's
Used to be a
friend
neighbour of mine.
Oh yeah, well, Rob's a great guy.
Yeah, I know.
And they
John.
took me over there, so I met Rob,
Yeah.
and they asked me to read at the Lamb in, I think it's the Lamb or one of those ones in Maidstone, and I was doing fanzines, and they just gradually got more poetry in, and then Sexton Ming, or polystyrene detectors, you call
Yeah.
them, had been writing to Rob, and there's a guy at Medway, very pretentious fellow actually, called Alan Denman, who was a literary teacher at Medway College of Design,
Right.
and he put some readings on down at the York pub
Right.
by the station, and that's where everyone sort of came together.
Right.
And actually, some I've been speaking to some fellows trying to research local stuff with Howard Inchbold, who were the poetry people in the 60s.
Right.
Very difficult to get information. They did do some publishing, and so Howard Inchbold was along. A couple of these old guys from the 60s who had been involved improperly in that real sort of on the edge of anarchic presses
Yeah.
that they were involved with, and then there was some guy, they were trying to do some literary thing in Gravesend, where they had a poet in residence from Cambridge
Right.
who was
An interesting mix.
a bit of a number. Yeah, and they started a small press out there, and me and Sexton were doing a press, and
Right.
then TV South wanted to film, that we were Medway Poets wanted to film us.
Right. Yeah.
And they said mine was unbroadcastable, so my poetry wasn't allowed to be in it. They said that was obscene.
Oh, okay.
And that's how I got expelled from St Martin's as well,
Oh,
for obscene poetry.
okay. So poetry's got quite an important aspect on your life flow.
Yeah, I still write a little
Yeah,
bit.
I know.
I've got a new collection I'm just doing again for the show in Berlin, where I'm showing all my workers' paintings.
Right.
I want to do, as a small press I work with in London, one-man job, Tangerine,
Right.
and they published me and chapbooks, and we're going to do a chapbook for that, and I want to do an album for that, and sort of like, it's interesting because all of these little strings and things
Yeah,
I
yeah,
do,
yeah.
they aren't allowed in the art world.
No,
That's
right.
completely confusing to them. If I release an album,
Right.
the art world is this really weird little
Yeah.
place where that would mean that, well, obviously he doesn't paint anymore,
Yeah.
And
I
if
can,
especially in England.
Yeah, yeah.
But around they say, well, I mean, I did an exhibition in South Korea during the lockdown, which strangely went ahead. And the comments were like, oh, it's incredible, they made 15 paintings. I mean, no one must know how much I paint, in the art world.
No,
It's like they don't want creative people involved.
no, it's amazing.
Creative people, of
It's
course,
amazing.
and with the records.
Yeah.
I mean, in the milkshakes, when we did, they said we were working with a small label in London, Big Beat, who were part of a Chiswick, who had started off in Soho Market, Ted Carroll and Roger Armstrong, and they said we're committing. They said you're committing commercial suicide with the amount of albums the milkshakes releasing. We said, oh, is that right? Because we never signed to anyone.
No.
I'm not signed to my galleries either. I can't
No.
sign anything
Oh,
to
right.
anyone.
Okay.
I'm not under contract with anyone for anything.
Oh, right. That's interesting.
Everything's
That's
handshake.
really interesting.
Everything's handshake.
Yeah.
And my record label,
Right.
which is a two-man show in London.
Yeah.
And we sort of like, so we can do what we like.
Yeah.
And we said, how about if we release 4 on one day then?
Now, I've got to get into this thing about how you do your recordings, because I think people find this absolutely fascinating. So how many albums have you got out?
Not dead sure. It's somewhere between, I see different estimates between 110 and 150.
So you got about 150 albums.
Is it, Huddy might know. Do you have any idea, Huddy?
I was put somewhere sort of like 120 or 130 or something.
Right. So
There's different
So this brings me to how you record.
Well, we don't have one way of recording, as it happens. We don't have a set way of doing it.
No.
But we don't, especially during this lockdown, we had some quite different ways of how we do it.
Yeah.
A lot of things were recorded on a half-track Revox,
Right.
some live and some.
So I can remember that about the
Yeah.
half-track remix.
Well, that half-track Revox belonged to Tony Pink, who was a local jazz group
Yeah.
in the 60s, and Big Russ went out with Tony Pink's daughter, and
Right.
Tony Pink lent us the half-track we used to record all the local jazz groups on,
Right.
and that's where that came from.
Right.
It's a nice Revox G36
Right.
half-track. and
So you're recording.
we have done. We don't use it anymore.
Oh, right. Okay. So
But
let's
we
say.
did lots of albums on it.
Yeah. So you would record the band live, presumably.
Sort of, but what happens is it's like everything's trickery. I mean,
Yeah.
as my
yeah.
mate,
Yeah, I know.
my mate Don Crane is in
Yeah.
the Downliner sect, one of my favourite groups,
Yeah.
and he's obviously a few years older. You know, his group played is it, what's the cafe in Soho? The Two Eyes, or whatever is it called, the Two Eyes? The way rock and roll started.
Oh.
He was in the skiffle group. That's
Yeah,
how
right.
old he is.
You're right. Right.
And
Yeah.
Don was in the Downliner sect, or still is. And I was saying to Don, with my daughter who's now 10, when she was 2, I said, "Here, Don, Scout really likes Downliners. She sings along to it in the car when Judy plays it, my wife." And I said, "It's just absolute dynamite stuff, fantastic," because their stuff is all recorded late at night on EMI with second engineer with a real row, because they're not paying for anyone, so their records are almost the best.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Don said to me, "Oh, well, you know, it's all smoke and mirrors." And I said, "Yeah, but your smoke and mirrors is better than other people's smoke and mirrors."
Yeah.
Because we will, like, if you look at this painting here,
Yeah.
now, this isn't a good example, because this is quite finished in the style. All right, look at how loose this one is.
Yeah.
Now, this took 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's quite likely that I will decide that one mark or one line that no one else looks at is a distraction that needs to be changed, or one mark or one dot.
Yeah.
And that's how we do records.
Right.
So what happens is there's a blinding the obvious mistake in the solo, but the energy of the solo is so good, so we keep that. But I do not like that thing in the bottom left-hand corner.
Yeah.
That goes. And then we also spend a lot of time making things sound like they've taken no effort.
Right.
And and when it's lucky, they don't.
Right.
But sometimes you have to really, really bend things. Do you know Louis Ferdinand Celine, the writer?
No.
He wrote Death on the Instalment Plan and Journey to the End of the Night. Very important French writer. Happened to be a schoolboy in Edinburgh, Rochester.
Oh.
For a little while. He's a Frenchman, and he disgraced himself by being involved with the Vichy government during the last war.
Right.
Because he was he had his best-selling novel in Russia, and he had to go to Russia in '36 because no money was coming out of Russia, so he was collecting them royalties by visiting Russia, and he came back and denounced Stalin and communism.
Right.
So obviously all those Sartre people and that who lauded him wanted him dead. So he was almost forced into this Vichy camp, and he is someone who will not agree with anyone or be anyone's pet
Right.
writer. He refused to be a champion of the left, which is a very big sin.
Yeah.
And anyway, Celine he's almost responsible for a lot of those beatnik writers, and some of this stream of consciousness to a degree.
Right.
And he had his very own idiosyncratic punctuation, and he also used a lot of slang which was never previously used in writing. So it's revolutionary modern writer.
Yeah.
And in an interview, someone said to Celine, "Well, it must be easy writing your book, because we could just record you. You can just speak, you record you, and it'd be done, you know, for your stories."
Yeah.
And he said, "No, it's nothing like that at all." He said, because you're changing the element from spoken into language, he said, into written language, he said, so if you have a stick, and I put that stick into water, the stick will look bent.
Yeah.
He said, so if I'm going to make that stick look straight when it goes in water, I have to bend it first, break it first, then put it in the water, and you'll say it's straight. And that's how he explained
Right.
what he was doing,
Yeah.
which is that smoke and mirrors thing,
Yeah.
making it more real maybe.
Yeah.
And anyone who thinks that something is something is mistaken.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. No, that's interesting because it's that sort of approach of. I mean, did you always sort of have that sort of feel about recording?
What happened was that when we were doing we did our first album on our own with the pop rivets,
Yeah.
and I knew nothing, and I couldn't hear the difference between a bass guitar, a lead guitar, a snare drum, or anything. Someone talked to me. All I heard the whole thing, and now I'm cursed into hearing bits and understanding bits and knowing how things go together. So all the magic's destroyed, or intensified. But what I did know was listening to this. Say, why does You Really Got Me sound better than what they can record now, or why does Link Ray sound better? It was a simple question. And when we used to go up to BBC, if they asked us to do a session up there, we'd have a complete war with them. And they'd sort of say, oh, they want to use some old-fashioned looking microphones. So we don't want, or we wanted to, Bruce had a Ludwig drum kit with all the skins on, and we didn't want it mic'd up, we didn't want the skins taken off, we didn't want anything dampened, and we didn't want to fold back because it made everything sound weird.
Yeah.
And we still do that. We don't have on-stage mixing because it doesn't sound as good. But what happens is then you get people sort of say, oh, I can't hear the guitar. They say, well, fucking move to where you can hear it.
Yeah.
You know, and you've got the sound dropping off as it moves through the room, all of these type of things. And when you've got this genuine, you can't contain it. Imagine the Jimi Hendrix experience playing live now.
Yeah.
Hendrix wouldn't be able to play because they'd say, turn the amp down, we're going to put it through this system, you're going to have the fold back. I was watching Canned Heat yesterday, doing on the road at, on YouTube, doing Woodstock.
Yeah.
They look like they're playing in a fucking 30-man capacity club.
Yeah.
And they've got no fold back, and they've got fantastic guitars. And the drummer is playing classic jazz standard, and just watching the guitarist guy, I can't remember his name, he's a really weird young fella, committed suicide, who taught Sunhouse how to play his songs when they rediscovered him during the 60s.
Oh,
Because and he learned all of his stuff off Blues. He was considered a genius kid. But regardless whether you like Canned Heat or not, you're watching this thing, you think, this is intimacy at Woodstock, they can do it.
Yeah.
They haven't got this barrier of them and us. And, and
I'll tell you
and
another
it's pure
example of
sound.
that. There's a Beatles recording on something called Blackpool Night Out. And it's introduced by Mike and Bernie Winters, right?
Yeah.
And they come on and they play 4 songs, and in between each number, they take it in turns to introduce the next one, while John Lennon's moving the microphone.
Oh yeah.
And all this sort of thing. So they're changing where they are on stage while somebody's talking, and it's just perfect. Sort of lesson in stagecraft. I always get kids who are involved in, putting bands together and everything to watch this, because it's like there's no light show.
Yeah.
There's nobody coming on and moving their bloody mic stands. They're doing it.
But when you see Hendrix, if you see Full Thing of Hendrix comes on, tunes his guitar up, and they do 5-minute tune-up talking to each other, and then begin the show. Not always, but often.
No. Well, in fact,
it's real.
I was talking to John Etheridge, his guitarist who's been Soft Machine.
All right.
And Hendrix.
Now I know people would be impressed by that, but I don't know Soft Machine. But Bruce and all the pop rivets guys, they all know all of that stuff.
Yeah.
They love all that.
John Etheridge is an incredible player. Used to be guitarist for Stefan Grappelli, the violinist.
Yeah. Well, I'm so so ignorant on so many things.
But John was saying that when he was a teenager, he knew Hendrix, and Hendrix used to come and see him play. So that's like, he said, because I said to him, when, what's the most amazing accolade you've ever had, type of thing. And he said, then he said about Hendrix coming to see him play, and Hendrix said to him, John, you're a really good player. And he said that was it then. From then on, he said it was only like sort of 14 or 15.
Yeah.
But he said you go and see Hendrix play, and he said it was always on the edge.
Yeah,
Always,
but
absolutely on the edge.
But he crams them things that shouldn't fit.
Exactly.
He's a beautiful player.
Exactly.
And you get real musicians who don't like it, think it's rubbish, because he's so... You know, you'll suddenly... What's that brilliant one on Lulu? And I think they're doing...
Oh yeah, that
and
when he does
doesn't
Hey Joe and ends up playing something else.
No, yeah, but during... I think they're doing... It might be in Hey Joe, but in... he crams in Day Tripper.
Yeah. That's
Everyone
right.
just suddenly put in Fraser Day Tripper.
That's right.
Fucking
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah.
And he's sort of like basically put it in there with a tyre lever.
Yeah.
But it still flows.
Yeah.
Because that's why no one can do Hendrix.
No, that's right.
No one
this
can
is-
do Hendrix.
But the thing is, it's a state of mind. It's his thing. It's like if you're not him, you know, you only end up copying. You know?
Oh yeah, and the thing with but Hendrix is sort of like he is such a bad influence on everybody else
Yeah.
because he is so like he ruined all of that English scene because everyone was so enamoured by how brilliant he was.
I finished this story and I'll tell you another one because we're on something here. So anyway, John Etheridge was saying you go and see him, and he said something would go wrong, like he'd break the string, he'd blow his amp up.
Yeah.
You know, the PA, the PA system would have blown up or something. He said, but before that, you'd have about 30 minutes or 40 minutes of just total brilliance, where everything was just flat out pushed to the edge, and then suddenly it would all fall apart, type of thing. He said, but that was the point, that he was willing to do that and take things absolutely to the edge all the time.
Yeah, Hendrix was like my favourite, probably still is, like from when I was about. My brother brought home, I think it was Axis Boulder's Love, maybe in 67, 68. And I heard that and I couldn't listen to it like 6 months. For me, it was like noise. And you know how pretty Hendrix, I listened to stuff like this is just noise. And then all of a sudden, one day, it just everything clicked.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can keep coming back to Hendrix and you listen to something and think, shit, I never noticed that. I never noticed that. You know, and you might have been listening to it for 30, 40 years. This
Hendrix is
just incredible.
And he break every rule. Nothing counts.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Apart from you can say that Cry of Love and Rainbow Bridge and him wanting to overdub everything does get rubbish. And Band of Gypsies are not as good and the Experience are the best.
Yeah.
But they drove him to, you know, they destroying that guy. And actually one of the last interviews I saw written down with him is saying he wants to go back to three-piece.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I've read
He
that.
realised
I
that
read
too.
that. Yeah. Well, the other thing was that. Do you remember Paul Jones? Paul Websall used to be a DJ.
I'm not sure.
He used to be on Radio Kent. But
Probably
Paul was telling the story that he was in the he used to work for Vox Jennings, you know.
Yeah.
And he was in the factory when Charlie Watkins brought in the Vox wah wah pedal, as it would become.
Yeah.
And he brings this thing and he plugs it in. He says, look at this guy. He says, I made this. He did this stuff, you know. And they sort of went, yeah, like, I couldn't get it. I couldn't get what this thing was doing, you know.
Yeah.
He said, it's a tone pot in a box. He said, yeah, but you listen to what it can do. And they were not impressed at all. And then they gave one to Hendrix.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But the interesting thing, you see, my point here is obviously Hendrix had a sound that he, in his head, that he could find on it. But then everybody else buys the wah wah pedal to be like Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
And that's, like you're saying, he sort of ruined it, really.
Well,
Because everybody then starts to want to be Hendrix.
yeah, no one can be him.
No.
He's the worst possible person you could choose to
Yeah.
try and be that, because it is the most impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, almost anything else is nearly possible, but you could not.
No. I
You
agree.
can't even get near.
No, you're right. Yeah. So let's talk about. You mentioned some of the other bands that you've been in or created, maybe.
Well, I don't know that. I think it's good.
So what are you working on now with the bands? You said you got this recording that you've done.
The William Loveday Intention.
Is that sort of a bit like James Harding, whatever it is?
I don't know what's the James. I don't know.
No, that's the Dylan thing, isn't it? Those recordings that became John Wesley Harding.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, those basement tapes, which are similar to what you're saying, like your lockdown stuff.
All right.
That I think some of the basement tapes that came out much later, that was the backbone of that John Wesley Harding.
Well, I don't know. What happens is people talk about music and art and things, and I'm really weird because I'm so dyslexic and so straight and things. But the Bob Dylan thing, all that happened was this. 5 months ago, I thought, I wonder what all along the Watchtower's like by Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Hendrix's gets on my nerves a bit. It's a bit overly fruity. So I thought, I wonder what it's like. And I listened to it. I thought, that's weird, that stuff. And I have listened to Dylan a bit. We had one album when I was a kid, when he was doing his folk stuff. And I've heard bits now. And I've seen him do live, like when someone shouts at him, which I
Yeah. You're a traitor or whatever. That one.
Judas and all that.
Judas. That's
And
it.
I thought, oh, that's interesting. I said to Judy, my friend, I think I might try and record that. She said, what do you want to record that for? I said, it'd be interesting to see his life. I like it. I find something. To me, Bob Dylan with that stuff, it was like eating an olive and thinking, do I like that or not? I'll try another one. And I sort of like did this recording, and I thought, and then it was this slippery slope.
Yeah.
And then I had to start looking online and listen to his stuff. So, One More Cup of Coffee, which we recorded, first time I listened to that was by Dylan, through, it was probably 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And we recorded it. And I'd always hated that song because I find it weird. And there was a guy, when we were in the Midway Poets and we played, we used to do the readings at the back of York. The guys at the Midway College Design, and all the guys 4 years older than me, who were hippies and musical snobs, and wore cowboy boots, and like Bob Dylan, and all of the worst aspects of that, they turned me off that stuff forever. And he played violin, and they did One More Cup of Coffee with some girl singing it there, and it was fucking awful. And I sort of like, and I instinctively have a sort of repulsion and distance from that type of thing. And also, I think they're like, interestingly, we've got this album of Bob Dylan's covers that I've just recorded, but at the same time, with CTMF, my punk rock group that still exists, I recorded a song then called Bob Dylan's Got a Lot to Answer For, and it's like just a 2-chorder, and it's like it says Bob Dylan introduced the Beatles to marijuana. What's he going to do that for? Though better bit for. Bob Dylan's got a lot to answer for. Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix wore Beatle boots and played pop guitar. Then he turned into a rock star. He was better, but what's he going to do that for? He's better before. Bob Dylan's got a lot to answer for. The Rolling Stones played R&B 12-bar. Brian played a Vox Phantom guitar. Then Mick went all la-di-da-da. They were better before. What's he going to do that for? Bob Dylan's got a lot to answer for. It says Bob Dylan wrote folk songs in the style of yore. Allen Ginsberg was a gobbledygook bore. What's he go sticking his oar in for? Bob was better before. Allen Ginsberg's got a lot to answer for. Nobel made his money making bombs for war. What's he want to go awarding literature prizes for? Bob might be knocking on heaven's door, but you've got to admit a lot of his poetry is pretty piss poor. The Nobel Prize Committee's got a lot to answer for. And then it says, Van Morrison grew mean, short and stout. Jim Morrison let the Lizard King out. Driving around all night in a Rolls Royce car, they took it all a bit too far. I'm not trying to settle some old score. I've listened to Bob since I was aged 4. But I'm just saying that a lot of things were better before, and Bob Dylan's got a lot to answer for. Something like that.
That's great.
And that was my antidote for getting intoxicated at age 60 in Bob Dylan, which I managed not to do in my entire life.
Yeah, well.
But he's like a, because he sounds like Mr. Burns now, and you watch this stuff, it's awful, and you can't believe the musicians there. But there's something about, you can see why people liked it. And what I like about Bob Dylan is what's wrong with it, not what's right with it.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what's bizarre about it.
Me and Huddy, I said to him yesterday, I said, listen to this, Huddy, and he's never heard Hurricane.
Right.
And I put Hurricane on, and he said, and that massive big drum fumble in the middle of it, we're both laughing at, like, it falls over the fucking drum kit. And Huddy said, I can't believe you'd like this, it's the sort of thing you wouldn't like. And I said, yeah, but I heard the story, and the story's amazing.
Yeah.
Of Reuben Carter and that.
Yeah.
And then I go and watch the documentary on Reuben Carter and decide whether he did it or not. And the rhyming and the way, again, because Bob Jack ties, jams things in that shouldn't fit. And he's got incredible diction.
Yeah.
Who did have.
Yeah, it did have.
Yeah. And there's something really compelling about Dylan that's compelling.
Yeah.
I don't think he should be, but all his fans make me hate. Well, all fans make me hate whoever their fans are.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about Dylan's, particularly like the protest stuff, right? Because I had some kids writing songs, and one of them wanted to write a sort of a protest song, and of course you think, oh God, that's difficult, because you've got to sort of come at it from some other angle. Don't say what it is. You've got to sort of hide it in the story somewhere. And Dylan was brilliant at that.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the thing, because it was like you had to sort of, what he was protesting about sort of seeped through. It wasn't obvious when you first hear it.
Oh yeah, and you've got those things like that. What's the one with the, there's one which is absolutely beautiful one about the, what's that one with the, about the murder of the black lady at the, it's got the two guys' names
Bob Dylan.
Yeah, that really brilliant one about Hattie, the something murder of Hattie. There's a newspaper article he got it from, where these two white guys got off for murdering this girl who was serving it.
Right.
It's just brilliant song.
So this is nice to sort of watch, Huddy.
Yeah.
So this is. Right.
Taking it back.
Yeah. That's really cool. Well, it's great to be here with you, watching all this stuff in progress. Really great.
Oh, that's good. I've got to have a look at what Captain looks like in a minute.
Well, I think
No, I mean the dog.
Captain the dog.
Well, this is going to be, that's what Harry's doing. He's called Captain Frank Worsley.
Right.
This is a puppy.
Oh, right.
And it's Jack, my daughter's dog.
Right.
And we got a cat named Shackleton, Sir and Shackleton. So then we had a dog, so he had to be Captain Frank Worsley.
Right, great. Well, look, I'll say thank you on here for your time, Billy. Really great.
Thanks.
Great to hear you talk about all your work and everything. Good to see you again, Huddy.
Yeah, good to see you too.
After I'd been speaking to Billy for about an hour, I realised I'd forgotten to ask him a question about how he made his overnight success. So the next couple of minutes, he explains how he became well known. It's quite interesting, actually. So back to the interview. Is it doing something? Oh, it is, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, what was your big break then?
Well, these things happen. My overnight success was in 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And but it all has a history because when I was at, it's people, because I've been written off and I've been very rude about a lot of contemporary art, outspoken, and I knew some of those people.
Yeah.
Everyone said that, you know, well, you're never going to be in the art world, and that's that. People who knew me. And then, but in the early 90s, my friend Peter Doig, he's a painter, who I was at St Martin's with, and we both liked the same music at St Martin's. He's the only friend I had at St Martin's before I was expelled. And he was in London, a Cubic Gallery, and they put on their own little exhibitions. And he said, would you like to do an exhibition? I'll put it on. And he introduced me to a friend of his called Matt Higgs, who wanted to be a curator, who is from his interest in his music background as well.
Mm.
So they put a show on, and I did another show with Matt in the 90s. And then some German guys came over who were doing a fanzine, who worked in a gallery, and I did a little exhibition with them. And then nearly years later, Matt Higgs was the director of White Columns in New York, and I said, well, why can't you do a show with me? My friend went over and spoke to him, and he said, well, we'll see how things pan out. And then it turned out he was ready to try and do a show, even though him and Pete had been told they were sort of like, what on earth do you like his stuff for? In the old days, me doing figurative during the Brit art stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he came over to look at my work, and ICA were going through meltdown at that time. And he happened to be speaking to a guy from the ICA, and he said, what are you doing over here? So I'm going to do a little exhibition of Billy in New York. He said, will you do one for us as well at ICA?
Right.
Because he was on his way out, this guy.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, so all of a sudden I had a show at White Columns, New York, and the ICA London, from nowhere.
Yeah.
Just because of these people that I'd known in the old past who liked what I did. And then when the ICA show was on, Tim Neuger and Schneider in Berlin, had happened to miss his plane, and Matt Higgs said, why don't you go and look at Billy's, got an exhibition. He's one of the kids who came over in the early 90s. And Tim Neuger is somebody who does what he wants to do.
Yeah.
And he said, would you like to do an exhibition? I knew nothing about what they do. And he said, well, we'll do a solo representation at Art Basel. I didn't know that Art Basel was the biggest art fair in the world. I didn't know they were a really big, prominent gallery. And I went out to Art Basel, never been there, never heard of it. And I had this sell-out show in Art Basel that Neuger and Schneider did, which a lot of people thought was a fake show and didn't believe what was happening anyway.
Right.
And then Lehman Warp in New York asked if they could represent me. And strangely then as well, because I'd also known Carl Friedman, who had made a lot of Damien Hirst's early work with him,
Yeah.
and was Tracy's boyfriend, Tracy Emmons' boyfriend, when after she left Royal College, and
Yeah.
she got with the Brit Art Bob. And Carl always wanted to do stuff with me. And Tracy had been very resistant because of my outspokenness about what they do.
Yeah.
But then, all of a sudden, with this big sea change, people had a totally different idea and opinion. So then I'm with Carl Friedman in the UK. So these people who came into, odd individuals came into prominence through no luck or planning.
No, it's amazing, isn't it?
So that's why I call it a lucky break in my overnight success.
Yeah.
Which it is really. And that's the other thing, is, you know, if you don't realise it's luck, then you're, because you don't need to be good, you can be as good as you like. Well, you know, like this thing with musicians.
Oh God,
I mean,
totally.
and musicians are a pain in the ass anyway. I mean, these
Yeah.
people who can really play. So what?
Yeah.
Loads of people can really play.
Absolutely. There's always a faster gun around the corner.
Yeah, and it's
You know
nothing
what I
to do with what it
No.
really is.
Totally.
So that was my lucky break.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for telling me that. That was really good fun, and it was nice to take a trip out to the wilds of the Medway to meet up with Billy and his son Huddy. The studio was such a fascinating place, and it was absolutely full of canvases of Bill's work. So anyway, if you want to find out more about Bill's stuff, there's some stuff in the show notes. And yeah, until next time.